God, grant to the living grace, to the departed rest, to the Church, the Queen, and the Commonwealth, and all people, unity, peace, and concord, and to us and all God's servants, life everlasting. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, be with you all and remain with you always. Amen.
Amen. This is the same song as the same tune as the University of Pittsburgh alma mater. There's Harry all by himself. Megan sent a note. I don't know if that note is in with the flowers or if that's not her note. I heard something about flowers, but I haven't seen the details. There's the Queen leaving. Since I'm left to narrate this myself, I couldn't find any CNN commentary because they know who all the people are. There's Harry. Where's William? That looked like William, but I don't think it was because he was with someone else. Well, wait, was that William and his wife? I didn't even recognize her. They were only allowed to have 30 people in the church. And it's on YouTube. The royal family uploaded this to YouTube because I couldn't get up at 6:45 in the morning. He's the Duke of Edinburgh. I guess his title is going to be given to someone else now. Maybe Edward, I'm not sure of the details. All right, let me see how much left on this feed. There's the cars leaving. Why is it doing that? Wait. Sorry. I hit the button and it was like... Is it a private burial? Because there's only 27 seconds left of this broadcast. Thank you for watching the live stream of the Duke of Edinburgh's funeral. What about the ones that had more than like an extra 11 minutes? What's on there? Let's check. Prince Philip funeral. Let's see if there's one that's more than an hour 22 and less than 4 hours. Let's see. CBS News special YouTube, 2 hours and 31 minutes.
I think it's a huge loss. Today, a final farewell to Prince Philip.
I, Philip, will become your liege man of life and limb.
The longest-serving royal consort.
Oh, this is
in British
CBC,
history.
not CBS.
He was the Queen's husband
Canada.
to Rock for 73 years. Patriarch to a family now gathered to say goodbye. The ceremony subdued by the pandemic. Now quiet, as the prince had wanted.
My dear Papa was a very special person.
He might have been our father, grandfather, father-in-law, but he meant so much to so many other people.
A life defined by service, by support for his queen, and love for his country and Commonwealth. Today, honored. This is the funeral for Prince Philip. And this is a live look at Windsor Castle right now, a mercifully warm, sunny spring day in the United Kingdom.
Wow.
This is where Prince Philip's funeral is being held. It is the royal family's hearth. Normally, Windsor is a place to gather. It was the place where the Queen and Prince Philip quarantined for months, and where the Duke of Edinburgh ultimately died. And so today's funeral is a much smaller, more contained ceremony than originally planned, as everyone can understand, given the moment we're in now. The public have been pointedly asked to watch or listen, but not gather. Good morning, I'm Adrienne Arsenault. Welcome to the National Studio and to our special coverage of the funeral for Prince Philip. The Duke of Edinburgh died a week ago Friday at the age of 99. His funeral has been planned for years. His wishes fundamental to much of what you're about to see. The pandemic, of course, has intervened. So what will happen today will be a scaled-back version of the original plan, very focused on his family and his military ties. It will begin with a family procession from Windsor Castle to St. George's Chapel, just a few minutes away. Normally, this would be through the streets of London. And all of this is due to begin in about half an hour's time. So let's head over now to Renee Filipponi, who is in Windsor. So Renee, I know we're seeing, some of the military bands, and we're seeing some of the branches of the military to which he was very attached. But can you help us understand what we're going to see over the next hour leading up to the ceremony?
Well, as you mentioned, we've been seeing this military parade now for the last little while. 730 members of the armed forces are taking part in the procession and the proceedings today here at Windsor Castle. Everything is going to happen behind castle doors. The public is not invited again because of COVID restrictions. But the Duke really has his finger on his own funeral. He planned a lot of it. So here's a look at how things are going to unfold over the next hour or so. The military members in procession right now are going to arrive at the quadrangle at Windsor Castle. At one point, we will have the Land Rover the Duke of Edinburgh designed himself, and in fact started designing it 18 years ago, will arrive, and it will carry his coffin from Windsor Castle to St. George's Chapel. Behind that coffin, we will see members of the royal family: Prince Charles, Princess Andrew, Princess Anne, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward. Behind them, that line everyone's been talking about, Prince William and Prince Harry, who will be separated by Peter Phillips, the son of Princess Anne. Behind them will be the Queen in the state Bentley. She will follow them behind with her lady waiting in the car with her. She will be masked, we're told. And the procession from the castle to the chapel will take a total of 8 minutes. There will be a lot of ceremony involved in that. The Queen will get out first and join the other members of the royal family who are already going to be headed to and arriving before her at the chapel. Once the coffin arrives, it will head up the stairs, and that's when there will be a moment of silence. The nation will pause. In fact, we're being told we're right near Heathrow Airport here. Even flights will not be arriving or landing for the 6 minutes around that period of time.
So Renee, I have to say, as we look at some of these pictures and I listen to your descriptions, in Canada, people watching this, depending upon where they are potentially heading into very strict lockdowns for COVID, facing soaring numbers, being restricted on how many people they can be with outside, even waiting for vaccinations. And so it's a bit unnerving to look at some of the pictures of people close together and unmasked. And I'm just curious, how front of mind is the pandemic there in the United Kingdom in this moment? What is the status there?
Well, just everyone around the world, people here are worried and watching these variants. However, things appear to be under control. There has been a lockdown, a hard lockdown in place since early January. The vaccine program has been quite successful. So we are at a stage here where things are actually rolling out. This is the first weekend since that lockdown where people are allowed to leave their home communities and travel for non-essential reasons. So if you actually look at the city of Windsor, which has been quite quiet during this lockdown. There are lots of people there today, not just reporters, not just security and police, but people who may be visiting the town just to get out of the city, or maybe there as well today with the hopes of getting a glimpse at one of the royals.
Okay, Renee, thank you very much. As you speak, we've been looking at pictures from within the quadrangle of Windsor Castle, where much of the ceremony will begin in terms of assembling the family, and then as the coffin begins to proceed. But we're still in the part of this day where it is largely ceremonial leading up to the moment of the procession. Renee, we will be back in touch with you throughout this morning. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And so, as we mentioned, the funeral will begin with a procession. The Duke's coffin carried on that Land Rover. You heard Renee describe that he helped design something he started working on back in 2003. He got so specific as to ask for the paint color to be changed at the last minute a few years ago, just to something that was more appropriate for the military service. Behind that coffin, members of the royal family will be walking. This is the route we expect them to take. This is the route it will take, all on the castle grounds. The coffin will depart at the state entrance of Windsor Castle, flanked by military pallbearers. It will pass by the Round Tower and head to the west steps of St. George's Chapel. Route, it is not at all what was in the original plan, which was known as Operation Forth Bridge, which was to involve much of London, but this is the moment we are all in now. So Windsor Castle, I think, as is understood, is in the community of Windsor. And as you can probably imagine, it is a place where almost everywhere you turn, people have stories and very close ties to the royals. Margaret Evans is with us with how people there are marking this day.
Adrian, we're just outside Windsor Castle. On the other side of the wall behind me is St. George's Chapel, which is, of course, where the funeral service is going to be taking place. As you know, Buckingham Palace, the British government, have really been encouraging people to watch the funeral from home. They don't want large numbers coming down to Windsor because of the COVID restrictions. And I think for the most part, people are trying to respect that. The mood here is very mellow. There are a lot of journalists, a lot of people out enjoying this, but not huge crowds. There are a few people who've come down with their flowers, and if they do, they're taken by stewards back to the other side of the castle walls so that the royal family can actually see them. The people of Windsor, of course, have a very special relationship to the royal family. They feel that they're neighbors. So if you talk to people, they'll have tales of sightings. They'll talk about seeing Prince Philip riding his carriage with his ponies around town well into his 90s. And of course, during this past year, we've seen Prince Philip and the Queen spending most of the pandemic here at Windsor. And people say that that has made them feel even closer to the royal family. There's genuine affection from people here as they watch the family try to say goodbye to the Duke of Edinburgh. Particular concern, of course, to the Queen, who is saying farewell to her husband of 73 years. Adrian.
Remarkable. You consider that the Queen's birthday is on Wednesday. She will be 95 years old. It will be her first birthday without her prince in 73, 74 years. So as we are waiting here, what you're seeing is that the military units and the marching bands have been forming up their contingents in Home Park, which is not that far away, so that they can then proceed to the quadrangle of Windsor Castle to eventually move on to St. George's Chapel. So I think one of the groups you have just seen is the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery. All of these units were chosen particularly by the Prince because of his affiliations with them. As you can imagine, when word spread that the prince had died, there was an immediate outpouring of stories and of memories about him. They came from all over the world and from all kinds of people because he was known as this very affable man. And former BBC royal correspondent Wesley Kerr has many of both those stories and memories. Thank you, Wesley, for joining us today. You know, we understand well that Windsor Castle holds a special place for the Queen. It certainly did for Prince Philip. The significance is also rich to you.
No, Windsor Castle is such an amazing and remarkable place, the largest inhabited castle in the world. The Queen is the 41st monarch for whom this has been a castle. It was actually started by William the Conqueror in the 1070s. I've been associated with Windsor Castle all my life. As a boy, I lived quite near. We used to come here for picnics. When the Queen gave me my OBE, it was here. I was here the day of the fire. I was here for the restoration. But this means so much in Philip's life. Amazingly, this is where his grandmother was born in 1863 in the presence of Queen Victoria. His mother was born here in 1885 in the presence of Queen Victoria. His mother's funeral was here in 1969. So although he was a Prince of Greece and Denmark, he was, of course, like Her Majesty, the great-great-grandchild of Queen Victoria. And then it's been very powerful in their lives. The first royal couple really to live here was almost their main home since Victoria and Albert. So it was so appropriate that he should die here, overlooking the Eastern Terrace Gardens, which he had laid out. He's was Ranger of Windsor Great Park for nearly 70 years, as he was also in charge of Sandringham and Balmoral, and he was incredibly innovative in his estate management, in his tree planting. I'm told that the staff working on the Crown Estate here, they feel they worked for him. Many have been here 50 years. They would see him carriage driving. If there was something he didn't like in the estate, they would get a handwritten note the next day. He would go round this estate actually without escort. The Queen loves it here. Yesterday she drove down to a part of the estate, Frogmore Gardens, with the two dogs, the Dorgie and the Corgi. That's her favourite relaxation. This place, incredibly special. And he was so innovative. I mean, he even created a vineyard here so that at state banquets you can get English wine.
That's incredible. And as I listen to all of this that you know, I'm curious about what it is that you feel, because you, as a correspondent, travel with them. You must have had encounters that are rattling around in your own head today.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been looking back and suddenly realised actually I knew this great gentleman for 40 years. He was Chancellor of Cambridge University when I was there in the late 1970s. I remember him making an incredible speech to a couple of hundred students, no notes, speaking for about an hour. And it was just before Margaret Thatcher came to power. And he was asked, what will it be like if there's a woman running the country? He said, I rather think a woman has been running the country for the last quarter of a century. The day I graduated in 1979, I was at a drinks reception and I was talking to him, Mother Teresa, and the Tory politician, Conservative politician, Rab Butler, former Deputy Prime Minister of this country. Butler said to Edinburgh, this young man, Wesley Kerr, wants to be Prime Minister of Jamaica. The Duke said, why on earth would you want to do something like that? And in fact, I think it was probably quite good career advice. I became a journalist instead, and actually later did a marvellous tour of the Caribbean with the Queen and the Duke, a 3-week tour in 1994, Guyana, Belize, the Cayman Islands, Jamaica, the Bahamas, Bermuda. So it was like one of these incredible tours, and you saw the energy with which they went about their business. The program maybe started at 8 in the morning, went on till 11 in the evening. You saw how incredibly fond they were of each other, how dependent they were on each other. Amazingly little security in those days. She had one policeman, he had a policeman, and there was a spare. They relied entirely on the security forces of the various Commonwealth countries and realms. They were her realms, and she relied on the security available to and just incredible. All the politicians said she's known all the prime ministers of this country. I remember Michael Manley saying to me in Jamaica, they're impressed at her knowledge, her desire to do walkabouts and communicate, but it was a marvellous companionship. There was one moment in Bermuda where I was actually alone with them. I was sending my dispatch back to London from the governor's desk in Bermuda, and I became aware that there was a presence through the open door, and suddenly these two heads came round and it was waving, as though they were like taking applause for the report I'd sent. It was the Queen and the Duke waving, and then they went upstairs. That she became very interested in my family. I remember her saying, when we were in Jamaica, saying to me, did you see your father, Mr. Kerr? And I told her, yes, I had. And then she said, and did he see me? So I love the idea that she wanted to feel, and Philip wanted to feel, that the incredible work they were doing was rewarded. And I think in Canada, you would have had the same feeling on the many visits they made there. And I think they made 23 visits together, starting in 1951, when they were the Edinburghs. And I think over 60 visits the Duke made. It's just astonishing. So I think that Canada was extremely close to their hearts, as it had been to the Queen's parents, the famous tour before the Second World War. So I think that in the Commonwealth, I think if there's one memorial to the work, yes, say places like this, it's the trees and the forests and the environment and the work with the World Wildlife Fund, the Duke of Edinburgh's award. But I think one thing which was their real passion project internationally was this free association of nations, which turned possibly the bad of empire into something incredibly positive. And in fact, there's an environmental aspect of that, because the Queen has this project, the Queen's Commonwealth Canopy, which is to restore forests, to plant trees all over Canada, as in so many other Commonwealth countries. There are trees planted by the Queen and the Duke, whether it's Rideau Hall or on anywhere really, Ontario, Vancouver, wherever there's a governor's mansion or so, that you will find that there are trees on these many visits planted by the royals. So that's a rather good memorial to them.
Absolutely.
But there's so much that this man did. It's hard to know where to stop.
Indeed, and Wesley Kerr, I have to say, your stories and your experiences are extraordinary. Thank you so much for sharing them with us today.
Well, I think he was a very remarkable man. I mean, he was born a prince, married a princess, but made himself into a great man. And I think we remember that great man today.
Indeed. Thank you, Wesley. And so if we can take a breath here now, just get a handle on what is happening. All of the military units have formed within the quadrangle at Windsor Castle. The next thing we expect to happen is that the family members who are not walking in the procession will get in their cars and head towards St. George's Chapel. We've seen a couple key images go by that I think are worth noting. You saw the Land Rover go by. That is the one that he rolled up his sleeves and helped design starting some 18 years ago, right down to the placement of the rubber stoppers in the back to hold the coffin, right down to the color of the paint. And quite touchingly, you saw the carriage. So I believe we have this picture. There it is. So that is one of the Duke's carriages. He designed this as well. This is a man who adored the sport of carriage driving. As you heard some of the, Margaret Evans in particular say, he was often seen driving the carriage right through Windsor. Those are his horses. On the front seat of that carriage are his cap and his gloves. And this will mean a lot to the people who are gathered there, because their image of him will have been so often in that carriage on those grounds on a beautiful spring day, just like this one. So while we watch, there it is, there's the cap and the gloves. While we watch, let's bring in some friends here. Let's bring in some familiar faces. Former CBC London Bureau Chief Anne McMillan and historian and broadcaster Dan Snow. Lucky for us, they sometimes come as a package. Dan is Anne's son. We've always considered you, Dan, an honorary CBCer. You have both covered the royal family for years. You've met them, you've spent time with them. And I'm wondering how you are remembering Prince Philip today. Anne, maybe we'll start with you. Lovely to see you, by the way.
Nice to see you too, Adrian. I would say that I'm remembering him, and I hope you want to remember, as what he always said was his most important job, supporting the Queen. And I've been talking to a lot of people this week who had close contact with Prince Philip and his wife, Queen. And one of them told me a really interesting story. She'd worked at Buckingham Palace and she said to me, all these stories about what a wonderful support he was are absolutely true. And she said, the Queen was very nervous about doing those Christmas messages. And she used to really get terribly worked up about it. And Prince Philip would sit with her for 2 weeks before she had to record the message, go through the message, and he'd make her read it over and over again until she was very confident. And if there were words that didn't roll off her tongue, he'd change them for her. And that was just one example of just how militant he was in supporting the church.
And Dan, I'm curious, you know, as we watch all of the involvement of all the different military units, can you help place for us Prince Philip's relationship with the military?
Yeah, I can try. As you can see, there's 700 military personnel involved from all the different arms of the British Armed Forces, and being British, we've got all sorts of uniforms and traditions that are unique. We saw that the 2 senior cavalry regiments of the Life Guards there, the Blues and Royals, of the Household Cavalry, the Blues and Royals and the Life Guards. We've got the riflemen, we've got people more around. But I mean, he was a naval man in terms of, say, the RAF taught him how to fly, flew for years in RAF aircraft until very late in his life indeed. But he was, during the Second World War, he was a naval guy. And he worked alongside the Canadian Navy, which my mum's dad, my grandpa, was proudly in HMCS Prince Robert. But so Philip would have served alongside many Canadian ships. And he served in the Mediterranean, he served in the Far East. He was there when Japan surrendered in Tokyo Bay. He saved the ship once off Sicily in 1943 because he threw a kind of fiery raft over the side of his ship, and it was bombed instead of his ship by Axis aircraft. So he served on the front line, very, very, very distinguished, long before he ever married the Queen. And so I think that's a huge part of today is the military connection.
Wait, what was that about a ship? Wait, I'm going to rewind that sentence. Where are we at? 2042?
And I know. And Dan, I'm curious, you know, as we watch all of the involvement of all the different military units, can you help place for us Prince Philip's relationship with the military?
Yeah, I can try. As you can see, there's 700 military personnel involved from all the different arms of the British Armed Forces, and being British, we've got all sorts of uniforms and traditions that are unique. We saw that the 2 senior cavalry regiments of the Life Guards there, the Blues and Royals, of the Household Cavalry, the Blues and Royals and the Life Guards. We've got the riflemen, we've got people more around. But I mean, he was a naval man in terms of, say, the RAF taught him how to fly, flew for years in RAF aircraft until very late in his life indeed. But he was, during the Second World War, he was a naval guy. And he worked alongside the Canadian Navy, which my mum's dad, my grandpa, was proudly in HMCS Prince Robert. But so Philip would have served alongside many Canadian ships. And he served in the Mediterranean, he served in the Far East. He was there when Japan surrendered in Tokyo Bay. He saved the ship once off Sicily in 1943 because he threw a kind of fiery raft over the side of his ship, and it was bombed instead of his ship by Axis aircraft. So he served on the front line, very, very, very distinguished, long before he ever married the Queen. And so I think that's a huge part of today is the military connection.
And he got the Canadian medal.
He's been decades got the Canadian Medal of Military Merit as well.
And I know
it's going to be on display on the altar in the chapel, and along with the 2 Canadian, they were the only country that gets 2, the only Commonwealth country that gets 2 medals on display today, and they were sewed onto pillows, I'm told, by seamstresses in St. James's Palace with fishing tacks, fishing wire. Anyway, the other one is the Order of Canada, which is also awarded.
He would have I suspect he would have loved the fishing line approach. Just as people are watching here, what we have seen is some of the vehicles arrive to carry the family members who are not in the procession to St. George's Chapel. I know you are also watching what is happening. What are you seeing here, Dan?
So it's the Royal Horse Artillery. These are the people that fire the multiple gun salutes on special occasions, the Queen's birthday, and now a sad occasion, which is Prince Philip's funeral. But they've been doing this job for a very long time. Traditionally they would gallop into battle, and they would unhook these they were sort of mobile artillery. They'd unhook these guns and fire them at the enemy. They could be rapidly deployed, and then they kind of took on a ceremonial role. They were made a royal by the Queen's dad. He just added his name to they were the horse artillery. He added royal in his own handwriting once we came to visit them. And we can see some of the royal dukes. So it was the Duke of Gloucester we saw getting in a car and driving off as well.
It's not a very long drive. This is not the procession through the streets of London that had been anticipated, but from listening to you, it sounds like this has as much or more meaning for the family in particular. We will check back in with both of you. I'm very eager to hear what this day feels like for you and some of your stories. I know you've got more. So we will check back in soon.
Getting a headache. I need some caffeine.
You're welcome.
Now we know that the Queen had a moment, or rather Prime Minister Trudeau had a moment with the Queen yesterday on the phone. They talked a little bit about their memories, his memories of meeting the family, and Renee Filipone, who is standing by and watching this with us. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Renee?
Well, yeah, there was that meeting over the phone between the two of them, and now we are hearing just this hour that the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has also sent out a statement in memory of the Duke of Edinburgh. And it reads that Canadians were deeply saddened to hear last week of the passing of the Duke, and that the thoughts continue to be with Her Majesty and members of the royal family as they mourn the loss of a beloved husband, father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. It also reads that the Duke of Edinburgh was a lifelong companion to our Queen and a dear friend to Canada, who was also a devoted public servant whose contributions changed countless lives around the world. You know, if it wasn't COVID times, the Prime Minister would have traveled here for this service, along with many other states of head of states, but that clearly isn't the case. There is one Canadian, however, who will be a part of the procession. Brigadier Paul Doyle, I actually saw him in one of the shots earlier. He is standing right now out in front of St. George's Chapel. He will be there when the coffin and the royal family procession arrives. And he saw this as a great honor. Have a listen to what he told me earlier.
Prince Philip, in the Second World War, served alongside Canadians and the service that he had with the Royal Navy. But then also, after the Second World War, the association that he had with the Canadian Armed Forces is extremely long-standing. So I really see me being there to bear witness to the service that Prince Philip rendered, not just to the United Kingdom, but to Canada also, in everything that he did for us who serve in the military. And I'm extremely honored, I'm humbled, and it's a privilege to be able to be there for the Canadian Armed Forces.
As we've been
I also spoke to him as well about, I spoke to him as well about during the rehearsals, and he just wanted to make it clear how military precision, everything is timed right down to the second this procession needs to reach the chapel just in time for that 1 minute of silence, which will happen right before the funeral service at 3 p.m. British time.
So we're not that far away from that now, Renee, but as you've been speaking, we've been watching pictures of some of the family members, not the ones who are walking the procession, but some of the others who've been arriving by car. We've seen Princesses Eugenie and Beatrice. We will also likely see the Duchess of Cornwall, Duchess of Cambridge, which is Kate Middleton, and Camilla Parker Bowles arriving there as well. From where you are standing, what are you seeing now?
Well, we are here at Home Park watching the broadcast of this as well. Everything is going right to order. Once those members of the royal family who aren't in the procession have left, that's when that coffin, the Land Rover that will carry that coffin, will arrive. And that's when the next step in these proceedings will take place. That's when we're going to start seeing members of the royal family who will be behind that coffin and following it in that 8-minute journey to the chapel. That's Princess Anne, Prince Charles, Princes Andrew and Edward, as well as Harry and William and other members of the family as well. And right now, here is that Land Rover. As you mentioned, he started the design on this 18 years ago, and it's in like a military color because that is really what he wanted it to be. He has his hands all over the ceremony, and it's just what he wanted.
And as you're speaking there, we are seeing that gleaming Land Rover arriving without the coffin. Of course, it is arriving to pick up the coffin, and at that point, once the pallbearers, who are made up of particularly chosen members of different military units, have placed the coffin on that Land Rover, it will begin that that slow procession, that is when we will see some other members of the family. This is exactly what.
And behind those members,
I was just going to say, Renee, this is exactly what he wanted, in the sense that he was entitled to a different sort of funeral, a much grander one, and there was no ifs, ands, or buts from him about what he wanted. That was not going to happen. And to have his coffin on a Land Rover, you know, he has been associated with that vehicle for some 50 years. He has driven them his entire driving life. He's a man known to love his vehicles, love to fly, love to go fast, love the military, and every little detail about that speaks to him. There is, of course, another vehicle that was made exactly like it to have standing by, because nobody wants something to go wrong with that one. The people alongside the Land Rover, as you will see throughout this day, there will be a combination of people there. These are his pallbearers from the military right now. What is it you were going to say, Renee?
I was just going to mention that, you know, once we've been talking about the royal family behind the Land Rover, the big moment I think everyone, you know, is waiting for, it's going to be the image that will stand in our minds is when the royal Bentley pulls up behind her members of the family, the Queen in that royal Bentley with her mask on, seated beside her lady in waiting. And I think that is going to be a poignant moment because, you know, we haven't seen her since this happened. As you mentioned, this is her husband of 70 plus years. The service is going to really be talking about that unwavering support he provided for her. That for me is the moment I'm going to be waiting to see.
As we just take a moment here, I would simply point out that around the quadrangle, in addition to the military units, are members of the household. So members of Windsor Castle household, what they called HMS Bubble, the people who stayed with Prince Philip and the Queen throughout quarantine, did not leave their sides, were with them right until the end, to his end, are there today to watch the man they worked with so closely depart. This is a good moment to bring in someone who knows the family, who knows the story of the royal family very well. Andrew Pierce is a royal commentator with the Daily Mail. Andrew, it is always lovely to speak with you, and I'm just curious what's on your mind in this moment.
Do you know, I was just thinking how profoundly sad this is, because we think about the great role Prince Philip has spent in our lives. 73 years he was married to the Queen, but this is also about the most extraordinary love affair. They were the greatest double act, I think, in public life we've ever seen, and how heartbreaking this is going to be for the Queen, alone, sitting alone in a pew in St George's Chapel, a chapel she loves very much, for the funeral not of the Duke of Edinburgh, but her husband, the father of her 4 children, the grandfather, the great-grandfather, as Prince Andrew said, the grandfather of the nation. And I know that she spent some time this morning just alone with him, his coffin in the chapel he's in, and the thoughts that must be going through her mind. What an extraordinary 73 years they've had together. And of course, this funeral has been absolutely Prince Philip to a T, even including, of course, the firm order. There is to be no sermon, no homily. He wants no preaching because he could never stand that sort of thing.
Interesting. There is now 5 minutes, Andrew, until the coffin appears, and I'm struck that he is everywhere but nowhere in the sense of this, that his presence, his absence, you know, I think Margaret Evans referred to him as an invisible pillar, is felt pretty heavily today. And I think so many people have seen him as an old man, but surely for the Queen, she must have in her head those pictures of him as this young, tall, blonde, strapping young man.
He was a dashing figure. He was a heartthrob. And she fell wildly in love with him. And there have been some wonderful photographs released of them throughout the course of the week, where you just see how happy she is in his company and how happy and relaxed he is in hers. It's been a remarkable relationship. And I think we all worry about the impact it will have on the Queen. Will we see as much of her? Perhaps not so much. No talk of abdication. That would never happen. But I think she will be a little lost without him, because he is that invisible pillar. We so rarely see the Queen on her own. We've got used to it in the last 3 years since he retired from public life, but we knew he was always there with one firm hand on the tiller. Lord Charteris, who was one of her longest advisors, said to me he was so important because he was the one person who treated the Queen as a human being and not as a monarch. And she was the one person who could say to Prince Philip, "Shut up."
Yeah, it's a lovely story. Andrew Pierce, thank you very much. We are just a few minutes away from the coffin appearing, and keep in mind, as we head into St. George's Chapel, that is a place that has so much meaning as well. The Queen's father, former king, is buried there. Her sister, who died 50 years exactly after her father died, the funeral was held there in St. George's Chapel. The Queen lost her sister, and then 6 weeks later, in 2002, lost her mother. She was there. She's been there for weddings as well, for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, for the princesses. Eugenie, I think, who just had her wedding there not long ago. So there's lots of family in the rafters and in the bones of that building for her there. I'm wondering if Dan Snow, if you can help us here. We see members of the royal household there, some of the medical staff in particular, who were tending to Prince Philip. But what are we about to see here, Dan?
Well, we got, just as we listened to the beautiful sound of Edward Elgar, one of the greatest British composers, seems always to be played on occasions like this. It's so poignant. And we're about to see the guests arrive. We're about to see the pallbearers do their duty with the coffin. As one of your previous speakers said, it's really interesting. They're all drawn from different parts of the armed forces. We share a special connection with. One of them is the third generation guardsman, whose grandfather performed a similar duty at King George VI's funeral. So it's just, we talk about Windsor as being a place of national significance, but also an intimate place where this family have lived for generations, and this chapel is like their kind of house chapel, but also for the military as well. Like many members of the forces, many people serving today will have had ancestors, the forebears, doing similar things on similar days. It's amazing. The thread of history is very visible. I'm the first of 4 generations that serve in the rifles that we just heard about earlier in the program. A unit that Prince Philip's got a particular connection with. My dad, my grandpa, and my great-grandpa all served in that unit. And there's going to be many people here today who this will not be the first time their families have taken part in event like this.
Indeed. And then, Macmillan, I'm wondering what strikes you about this. I know that you've been, as a journalist, thinking about this day and this moment, and in some ways knew what it would look like, but what does it feel like?
Well, I imagine when this was called a no-fuss funeral by the Times newspaper last week, I kept thinking it can't possibly be no fuss. This is Britain. And sure enough, it is absolutely wonderful to watch all these military bands going along. And I think we're going to find the procession behind the Land Rover, talking the Land Rover, extremely moving. Do you know, Adrian, you've got to admire the Queen. Here she is in deep mourning of her beloved husband. And yet she made a very important decision this week. And this is what is so amazing about this nearly 95-year-old woman. There was a fuss about whether or not Prince Harry would be allowed to wear a uniform because, having left the royal family, he has surrendered all his honorary military leadership. And then we were told that Prince Andrew wanted to wear an admiral's uniform. He is an honorary vice admiral, but has not yet been made a full admiral. And I think the Queen just said, okay, no uniforms. We're going to have men in suits, women in dresses with medals.
Indeed, because this day is about Prince Philip, and as we see here now, that is his coffin being carried by his pallbearers, leaving from the Undercroft via the steward's door. That is his naval cap atop it.
Hello. I'm watching the replay of the
So
funeral.
nothing but the sound of those boots on the gravel. You saw Prince Philip's standard, his own personal standard, draping that coffin with his naval cap on that Land Rover. Next, we'll see the royal family. We know they're already assembled there. We see Prince Charles, Princess Anne in the front row, Prince Andrew, Prince Edward.
With the commentary
and
from
grandchildren. The eldest grandchild is Peter Phillips. It's Prince William, Prince Harry. The Queen is not alone in that car. She's joined by a friend, her lady-in-waiting, Lady Susan Hussey, who's been with her for a very long time. So the band of the Grenadier Guards begin this procession. It will only take about 8 minutes from the quadrangle here to St. George's Chapel. See with the members of the royal family there, no uniforms, their day coats with their medals, Princess Anne, Prince Charles. It's very hard not to think of the last time Prince William, Prince Harry, and their father walked behind the coffin. They were joined then by Prince Philip, who led the way. This day is about him, but it is inevitable that people will be looking at those two young men who both adored their grandfather and hope that from this some relationships can be rebuilt. You will on occasion, by the way, hear minute guns. So those are being fired by the King's Troop. There you go, that's one now. Royal Horse Artillery. It's coming from the East Lawn. That will happen throughout the procession. And that bell you heard is the curfew tower bell. It too will continue to sound throughout the procession. And keep in mind, every choreographed moment that you see of this was not done in Prince Philip's absence. It was done with his hand. He was the architect and choreographer of just about everything you're seeing here right now. Was not done in Prince Philip's absence. And for those of you who are wondering perhaps where the rest of the family is, where the great-grandchildren are, a separate arrival of some of those family members like Kate Middleton, Camilla Parker Bowles, the Duchess of Cornwall, Duchess of Cambridge, Princesses Eugenie and Beatrice, went into vehicles ahead to St. George's Chapel. This is the children and the grandchildren who are walking behind, joined, I would say, by some of the members of the royal household who were particularly special to Prince Philip as well. They are at the back of that procession, just before the Queen in her Bentley with her lady in waiting. Catching glimpses there of other members of the royal family. There's the Duchess of Cornwall, Duchess of Cambridge, waiting alongside them. Her Majesty the Queen, she will be 95 on Wednesday.
Low battery. Oops. Let me plug this in. All right.
A moment to look back at her family. So they are all going now into the west steps outside St. George's Chapel. This is a beautiful sunny day. It's a good one for them, mercifully. That was the piping party. That's something called the still, which was asked for to happen only when the Land Rover is stationary at the foot of those west steps. Those pallbearers, the bearer party, are the Royal Marines. Those flowers at the top of the casket were chosen particularly by the Queen. You know that as the casket goes inside, you'll hear from the piping party again. They will pipe something called the side. And then, soon after that, there will be a national minute of silence. Nothing happens, not even flights in or out of Heathrow in that minute.
See, that's what I didn't know. Why they were. I thought that my feed froze. I didn't know there was a moment of silence until I watched it with the commentary. That's why I looked for a feed with commentary.
And the minute of silence will begin as soon as the casket gets to the top of the steps. And when this service begins, a couple things to keep in mind. You will hear music specifically chosen by the Prince. Listen in particular for the buglers of the Royal Marines. They will be sounding something called action stations, which is all hands to the battle stations. This is something that means a great deal to the Prince, and this is what he wanted people to hear on this day. Did you catch that in the moment of silence, that the only sound was that of the birds at Windsor Castle outside St. George's Chapel? For a man who loved the environment, who was the head of the World Wildlife Fund, that's pretty special. So at this point, we could use the help here of Dan Snow.
Okay, it's sort of complicated.
Dan, as you are watching, Dan, can you give us a sense of what we should be looking for here and listening for?
Well, I think we should be the simplicity of it. That there's no sermon. There's no. He doesn't want people extolling all the amazing things he did during his life. And I think it's the symbolism. I think the things you look for, we all royal historians are trained to look at, just as art historians, we're trained to look at the symbolism, who's sitting where, what the music is, what they want to show the world. In the case, for example, they want to show the world close connections with Canada, because as my mum mentioned, there were two decorations on display. But also, I think that naval hat on his coffin is so important. He began his life being rescued, age 2. He was rescued by the Royal Navy from a revolution in Greece. He ended up being smuggled out on a fruit crate off the island of Corfu onto a waiting British ship. He then served. He won top cadet of his year, done on merit in the Naval College here in the UK. He, probably his happiest times of his life really was in command of his own ship in the Mediterranean just after the Second World War. So I think the centrality of that sword that cap are so important.
And Dan, is there anything that you see? You said where people are sitting and how they correspond with each other. Are you reading anything into what you see here? I don't know that it matters on one level, but in terms of the relationship, and I'm thinking about the two princes who adored their grandfather. What are you seeing there?
Well, obviously the one thing we're already seeing is how in this family, duty is everything. You put on a suit, you walk in step, and ultimately, if the Queen says do something, you do it. I think the other thing you're seeing is the importance. Philip was often, well, there was some embarrassment in the UK, I guess, around Philip's German relatives. All of his sisters married people that had gone to fight for the Third Reich in the Second World War, and the fact those descendants are being included, those cousins of his are being included in this service, the most intimate family group imaginable. There's only a couple of dozen people here. I think is important. I think it says something about his true private feelings, his love of his family that was spread all over Europe by war, revolution, upheaval. I mean, the 100 years that he lived through was the most turbulent and extraordinary 100 years in history. When Philip was born, we didn't know about the Big Bang, we didn't know about DNA, we didn't know about neutrons. This 100 years that he's lived through is something else. And he, in a way, has in one life, he embodies that transformation that's occurred on our planet over the last 100 years.
Indeed. So as we listen to you and we see the Queen in the lower left of your frame, sitting alone relatively alone because of the social distancing rules that are necessary by this wretched era everyone is living through. Let's just listen in for a moment to the music of this day. So the service is just about to start. It will be conducted by the Dean of Windsor. As you will, we will just be listening to it. We're not going to interrupt it until it's over. And then we'll talk about some of what has unfolded there.
We are here today in St. George's Chapel to commit into the hands of God the soul of his servant Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. With grateful hearts, we remember the many ways in which his long life has been a blessing to us. We have been inspired by his unwavering loyalty to our Queen, by his service to the nation and the Commonwealth, by his courage, fortitude, and faith. Our lives have been enriched through the challenges that he has set us, the encouragement that he has given us, his kindness, humour, and humanity. We therefore pray that God will give us grace to follow his example, and that with our brother Philip, at the last, we shall know the joys of life eternal. A reading from the book Ecclesiasticus. Look at the rainbow and praise its maker. It shines with a rounding the sky with its gleaming arc, a bow bent by the hands of the Most High. His command speeds the snowstorm and sends the swift lightning to execute his sentence. To that end, the storehouses are opened and the clouds fly out like birds. By his mighty power, the clouds are piled up and the hailstones. The crash of his thunder makes the earth writhe, and when he appears, an earthquake shakes the hills. At his will, the south wind blows, the squall from the north, and the hurricane. He scatters the snowflakes like birds alighting. They settle like a swarm of locusts. The eye is dazzled by their beautiful whiteness, and as they fall, the mind is entranced. He spreads frost on the earth like salt, and icicles form like pointed stakes. A cold blast from the north, and ice grows hard on the water, settling on every pool, as though the water were putting on a breastplate. He consumes the hills, scorches the wilderness, and withers the grass like fire. Cloudy weather quickly puts all to rights, and dew brings welcome relief after heat. By the power of his thought, he tamed the deep and planted it with islands. Those who sail the sea tell stories of its dangers, which astonish all who hear them. In it are strange and wonderful creatures, all kinds of living things and huge sea monsters. Action is his end, and by his word all things are held together.
Okay, I'm pausing it and I'm ending this broadcast because I'm watching the replay of the funeral with the CBC commentary, because when I watched earlier, I watched without commentary, but I have a call that starts in 1 minute, so I'll be back later. The figure skating is on NBC Sportsnet from 9 to 11 Pacific, and the exhibition skate is live at 10 p.m. Pacific, 1 a.m. Eastern. Premium, which is free. Have a cable subscription, or it's $4.99 a month. Or if you're in Europe, I believe you can watch on the ISU channel, which is geo-blocked in the US. Okay. Have a good day and stay safe out there. Bye.